Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome to Glow with Lola, the podcast where we dive into personal growth, wellness, and real life transformation. I'm your host, Lola, here to share my journey, lessons, and the tools that help me glow from within. We keep it real, we keep it raw and unfiltered, from navigating grief to healing, to balancing hormones, mastering self care. My goal to inspire, empower, and remind you that you deserve the life that you want. So grab your favorite drink, get cozy, and let's glow together. On today's episode, we have our lovely guest, Edward. Edward is my brother. He is 13 years old, and I am super excited to have him here and hear him talk about how he has been navigating a loss of two parents and living with his amazing sister. So, I have some questions prepared for our lovely guest, and let's see how he answers them. So, let's start by share about yourself, Edward.
As you guys heard, I'm Edward, I'm 13. My amazing sister Lola, probably one of the best sisters that I have. A little bit about me. I'm more like a very sporty guy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm into multiple sports like hockey, basketball, baseball.
Mm-hmm.
I like a lot of foods.
Mm-hmm.
Traveling also.
Yeah.
Travel partners for life.
Hashtag.
Hashtag, yeah. I'm pretty tall for my age. I could
You
say
are
that
pretty
too.
tall for your age.
5'8.5", I think.
Yeah.
Last I remember.
A little bit of background. Edward and I have a 12 years gap between us. I was born in Israel and Edward was born here in Canada. When I was told that I'm going to have a sibling, and as you can imagine, 12-year gap, it's pretty big. He is 13 years old now. I just turned 26. It's quite of a big gap, but I think parents did smart. They first raised a babysitter, then decided to have a second child. And I don't think you can complain because you've been having an amazing big sister. We're going to dive in and feel free to take time and think about your answers. It's going to be a little bit emotional, but I want you to share your journey. I did share mine before and I want to hear your side. What do you remember most about our parents? Let's start with mom or dad. You choose.
I'll start with dad.
Okay.
I'll start with dad.
Okay.
So me and dad, as you know, we were really close.
Mm-hmm.
And we liked a lot of stuff in common, like fishing trips, going out to eat. But probably the best memory I have about him is when he would take me on his trucking trips.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if Lola's talked about this or not, but our dad was a trucker.
Mm-hmm.
Long haul trucker, gone in like 2 weeks, 4 maybe. And some of the best moments I had with them was when he would take me with him. Because it's pretty interesting seeing how he does his work, where he goes, how far, and he does go far.
So when you think of him, what's the moment that comes to your mind?
Fishing.
Fishing.
Yeah. There was this one moment I remember when we went fishing.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't pay for the parking.
Mm-hmm.
And when he had to go pay for the parking, he said, stay here, watch the rods.
Mm-hmm.
And his rod just went crazy.
Mm-hmm.
When he came back, I had the fish just laying there on the sand. It was a beautiful moment.
Nice, nice. And Edward started fishing on his own too.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like when you go fishing on your own, that's your moment of reconnecting.
Yeah, for sure. Especially when you go with your friends. It's like you're focused on talking with them about, how it's going and stuff. But when you go alone, it's a core memory that you remember. Like you're just sitting there thinking, waiting for the fish to bite. It's pretty wholesome. Even if you come empty-handed, it's still pretty nice. You get to go out to the body of water, relax, time away from like all the important things, take a breather and reset.
Share a moment that you remember most about our mom.
Oh, we had plenty of moments. There was one moment that I actually really remembered. It's with both of them. I remember when they used to work team and they came back from...
So team, at some point, our mom got her license to be a truck driver as well. And they went for long hauls together as partners.
Yeah. And I remember I was in school and I was never expecting them to go back. And we were in phys ed. And I remember what's it called? Because back in those schools, the phones didn't just have phones there standing in the phys ed room. It used to be like a little intercom speaker and you would press the button to get to the office. And there was this like beep whenever someone would call in. So the teachers would know because it gets loud and rowdy in the gym. They said, can we get Edward in the office? I thought I got in trouble. I used to be a really trouble kid back in those
You
days.
were.
Yeah, always finding excuses to go home.
And not study.
Yeah, and not study, yeah. I walk into the office and guess who I see standing there? Mom and Dad. It was truly an amazing moment because then we also went out, we grabbed McDonald's, and then we went back home. It was a truly wholesome moment. I really love that moment.
Yeah, I remember when he was in kindergarten, and I think it was Mother's Day, and you had to write, "Why do you love your mom?" And then Edward wrote, "I love my mom because she always takes me to McDonald's."
Yeah, I remember I did write that, yeah.
That's hilarious. So, a little bit of our childhood upbringing. Edward was born in Winnipeg in Canada. When we grew up, I always felt like a parent to you. You know, when a woman gives birth, a lot of times she has to recover her body, her hormones. She was sometimes very emotional trying to put him to bed or feed him, or just that connection that you have with a child. But luckily, she had me. So I remember literally raising you, changing your diapers. She had to go to school and study English, and dad was away for his long trips for 2 weeks. So I was babysitting him, feeding him, putting him to sleep, changing his diapers. That's the dynamic that we always had between us. And I remember when we were growing up, mom really wanted us to be in a good relationship. It was really important for her because Edward is lovey-dovey. He always wanted to give kisses. That was his thing, okay? I was a teenager, and any like extra affectionist showing towards me was like, "Oh, can you stop it? Like, don't touch me, don't kiss me, don't." And I would yell for
To
him to
this day,
stop.
too.
I'm
Well,
better.
sort of, yeah.
I'm a little bit better. But yeah, so she really worked on me being more affectionist towards you. Until this day, I feel like the universe has its own thing. The way we were growing up together, walking hand in hand in life, now it makes sense to me why it was the way it was. Because a lot of times when mom and dad became truck drivers, long haul for the summer, so their goal was to do it during the summertime. And then during winter, my mom stays at home with Edward. I go back to school, and dad is a solo driver. But in the summer, they could make good amount of money. As a post-secondary student, our school year was September till April. And then we're home May, June, July, August. So 4 months about working together. So that's pretty good money for them to earn. I was sitting with Edward. I remember we did it one summer where I was with him for 4 months. They would come for like 2 days, shower, meal prep, sleep at home, and then go for another week or two. So I had to entertain him. And I was watching 2 other kids. We were swapping because I was working as a server to earn some extra cash to go back to school while trying to make a plan of how to entertain little kids during their summer break. So I remember we used to go to Wasaga Beach a lot.
That was like probably the best times ever. We were just at the beach all day, every day.
Yeah.
It was truly an amazing moment.
So we always grew up together. If Edward had issues at school, I would be solving them. After mom's passing, I felt like I was very involved with you. So my contribution from being like 50-50 with mom, when I went to school, it was 80-20. And then when mom passed away, it was 75% me, the rest dad, because he was going through his own grief at the time. How did you feel when you heard mom passed away?
When we were in Israel for mom's treatment, we had that house. I was in the room. I remember
The apartment?
Yeah, the apartment. Because I remember I had mom's phone when she was in the hospital. And dad would usually spend all of his moments outside, smoking on his phone and everything. And in the room that I was staying in, there was a little window at the top of the, you know what I'm talking about, right? And it was always open, just the netting was there. And I would hear him laughing and stuff like at the videos he was watching. And then I heard him laughing, but it was a weird laugh. Almost sounded like crying. I went out to check to see what happened. I was like, did he fall or what?
Yeah.
And then I just see him crying, phone on the floor. And I was like, what happened? He just puts his head to my chest and he's like, mom's gone. And at that moment, I just froze, you know? It was like, unreal, you know, because at the
Mm-hmm.
time I didn't know what like I knew what it was, just I didn't know mom had it. I thought it was some other disease.
Mm-hmm. So just for background stories, mom had cancer. She was fighting it for almost 4 years, and it was in her lower colon. When they diagnosed her, she was stage 3. I was 18 at the time. You were,
7.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. No, 8. 8, because I turned 9 when we were there.
You were 6 when she was first diagnosed.
Oh,
Edward
yeah,
was
I was
6
6.
when
Yeah.
she was diagnosed, and when she passed away, you were
9.
9. So 9-year-old trying to understand what just happened.
Yeah, and at the time I didn't actually understand the concept of death.
Mm-hmm.
When a loved one passes away, that
Mm-hmm.
you're deeply like deep with them, like cross fingers, everything.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you start understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Before I would hear dad say, "Oh, this actress died," you know, I was like, "Oh, you know, I don't know what that
Means
yeah
it doesn't
necessarily means."
affect you when
It
it's
doesn't affect me,
someone.
yeah, when it's someone I don't really know.
Yeah.
But then when it's someone you deeply love, that's when it hits you really hard.
You heard it from the window. You came outside to see what was happening, and then dad told you that mom is gone.
Yeah.
And then what do you remember feeling after?
I was in shock. It took me like a
Mhm.
minute to process the fact that she's gone.
Mm-hmm.
The worst part probably was is that I didn't get to say goodbye,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it was for the best. I don't think neither you
Mm-hmm.
or our relatives wanted me to see her in that shape, especially at the
Mhm.
young age that I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and then I remember dad telling me like how every day you would text him from the hospital updates. But then when it actually hit me, like after the 10 minutes, I was like, wow, you know, like she's gone.
Mm-hmm.
My most beloved person in the world, she's gone.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and then me and dad were just sitting there
Mm-hmm.
in total silence. And then yeah, that was that.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I can remember at least.
Yeah, and then the funeral happened. I think it was 2 days after she passed away.
Hmm.
We were trying to figure out where we're gonna bury her, how we're gonna bury her, and so on. What do you remember about her funeral?
I didn't shed a single tear.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't shed it. Maybe when I was what's it called? When they were actually lowering her into the grave, but
Mhm.
other than that, I didn't shed a tear.
Mhm.
There was that little room, I don't know
Mhm.
if you remember, where the coffin was
Yeah.
open. I wanted to go into, and I remember everyone was just holding me back, trying to like pull me back. I was like, you know what, fair enough. I'm not gonna try to do anything about that.
Mhm.
Maybe again, it was for the best, because
Mhm.
that's even worse. I'd rather see her in the condition she was in the hospital
Mhm.
rather than see her actually passed away.
Mhm.
So it was probably good that they held me back.
Mhm.
After, when we were wheeling her to the very bottom row,
Mhm.
that's when I was like, you know what? Like maybe it's okay to not hold it back.
Mhm.
As they were lowering her, that's when I started kind of breaking down.
Mhm. Yeah, I felt like you were holding it together, but then when they started lowering her, I remember I think Aunt Lena came to you
Hmm.
and she told you it's okay to cry, right? And then
Yeah.
you screamed and everybody looked because the funeral was a lot of people came to show her
Yeah,
respect.
a
And remember
lot.
you yelled, and that's the first time we've seen you express an emotion.
Yeah.
I'll never forget it. But yeah, it was intense. But I feel like this is a therapy session
Yeah,
for me
rather
and
than
you
Mhm.
because when you go through grief, you grieve the same person, but everybody deals with it very differently
Mhm.
and it's lonely. So we'll be in the same house even after her passing. It was me, you, and dad, and everyone would cope so differently. I would be out and about. You know that.
Yeah, for
My
sure.
party era.
Mhm.
You were with dad.
Yeah.
How do you feel like dad was coping with her death?
He spent a lot of his time in the kitchen and in the garage too. I feel like he was trying to stay strong for me because I
Mhm.
can tell on the inside he was shattered. It's a person he deeply, deeply loved.
He wasn't loving.
Yeah,
How was dad, in your opinion?
holding back heavy emotions. I know he would spend most of his time in the garage. I know he didn't want to be in the house whatsoever because it
Mhm.
brought back heavy memories.
Mhm.
Before we
Moved.
left, Yeah, moved. We lived there for like what?
We lived in Angus before we moved to
Angus.
this house that we live
Yeah.
in now.
For 5 years, 4, 5.
Initially, how long?
Initially 5.
5 years, yeah.
So I think he wanted to spend most of his time in the garage because him and mom
Used to sit there
used to sit
and
there.
smoke.
Yeah,
There were
for sure.
smokers.
Oh, heavy
In case it
smokers.
wasn't not
Heavy-
heavy, but they would smoke
Well, yeah.
together. And then Dad became a heavy smoker.
Yeah.
He started to smoke a lot.
Oh yeah, a lot.
Packs all day, every day. When we moved to this current house that we live in, he would take a picture out to the garage with her, lit a candle, light a cigarette for him, and lit a cigarette for her to smoke.
Because I remember both had individual things like that they put their cigarettes in, or that the ashtray was it called?
Ashtray,
Yeah,
yeah.
the ashtray. Yeah.
So he would lit it, put it on the ashtray, and then the
Yeah,
little, what do you call it?
the ash.
The ash would fall straight to the ashtray.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
How did I cope?
Yeah.
When we came back, we had to be like in the quarantine.
Mm-hmm.
I hated
It was
those
COVID times.
COVID times, big COVID times. For me, I would just spend a lot of my time in my room. I would be playing video games. You weren't able to go out, hang out with your friends as much. I had close friends, Ethan.
Yeah.
And when we would hang out with them, even outside, we had to wear masks and stay 6 feet apart.
Yeah. Everybody was scared.
Oh, yeah, very scared.
Yeah. I feel like with Mom, it didn't hit you.
No, it didn't hit me as hard.
No.
With Dad, it hit me way harder.
Yes, it did. But then I think Mom, you were hit with Mom's grief later.
Yeah, later. Because then when you realize they're both gone, that's when I realized that they were both gone.
Yeah.
That's when it hit me hard about Mom.
How did you feel when we lost Dad? Let's give a little bit of background story. Mom passed away it's going to be 4 years ago. Dad passed away 3 years ago. He passed away 11 months after her. And his death was very sudden, right? He got his COVID vaccine, and
that's when things started to roll downhill.
Yeah, so the reason why he couldn't get his vaccine for a very long time, he was a transplant patient. He had his heart transplant done. And for a period of time, the hospital did not have any clearance to allow a transplant patient to do vaccine. Right. And then for some reason, they cleared it out. But what the vaccine basically does is entering a virus into your body and let your body fights it to build the antibodies that you need in case you get sick. So you're not as sick as you would if you would actually get, what do you call it?
COVID.
If you get COVID. So his first vaccine, he wasn't feeling well. And then his second vaccine, he was feeling worse.
Terrible.
Very bad. Now, the reason why he had to get a vaccine, if you remember, if you lived in Canada, we had the truck movement. So basically obligated to get your vaccine done in order to cross the border in the States. Otherwise, you would have to quarantine every time you do a trip. And we also had to travel for Mom's 1-year anniversary since her passing. And we wanted to be there with the family to respect her and her memory, and it was mandatory for travelers to get vaccinated. So after he got the clearance, he got his first vaccine, and then he wasn't feeling well, and then his second vaccine, he started to feeling really bad. So I think the first one he did in October, November-ish. The second vaccine, I think you do it 3 weeks after. He did it right before Christmas, right? And New Year's. That's when he had shortness of breath. He had fever. One of his hands went numb and his heart rate was skyrocketing. Yeah, he was not feeling well whatsoever.
A bad moment about that I remember. When he was cooking, because you know how he stayed up really late. I don't think he had a terrible sleep.
And I was sick with COVID too. So I got COVID and I was in quarantine in my room. And you guys were making me food, bring me drinks to the room. Like at the door, I would wear a mask every time I would go to the bathroom. I was quarantining in the house. So I don't know if he got COVID first or I got, like, it's not clear who brought COVID home because I was quarantining, but he wasn't feeling well at that time already. But my symptoms were really bad. Like I had the fever, I had the chills, I had the body ache. I lost smell and taste buds. Anyways, I had the entire symptoms. So I wasn't sure who brought COVID in.
So yeah, when he was cooking for the New Year's dinners and stuff, because you know how we would have
The
that big table. Yeah,
traditional
oh, it's the Russian tradition for sure.
pachuba,
Pachoba, Olivier,
Olivier.
yeah, all that. And he was really into soda,
Yeah,
like the sparkling waters.
yeah.
And I remember when his hands went numb, both of them, they were shaking extremely.
Mm-hmm.
So he had me fill the cup for him and also like help him drink it, hold it
Mm-hmm.
for him. And yeah, that's when I knew it was gonna go downhill very
He
fast.
dropped the bottle.
No, he didn't. He didn't drop the bottle because he
No.
had me fill it for him. But you know that corner where we used to have the microwave?
Mm-hmm.
He would hold on at the corner with the sink and the microwave, and he almost like fell to the ground.
Mm-hmm. So he was extremely fatigued.
Mhm.
And listen, 11 months after losing my mom, it was 10 months at the time. It was scary. None of us wanted to go to the hospital. He didn't want to go to the hospital because he had his heart transplant and he was almost a year in the hospital after having two open heart surgeries, right? He
Yeah.
had LVAD first installed to help his blood pump through his body. And then the second surgery that he had was the actual heart transplant. And my mom was there with him. So the person was basically living in the hospital for a year. So he was traumatized to do it without her. I was traumatized because I spent the entire cancer journey with her in the hospitals, and the last thing I wanted to do was do it
Take another-
again.
yeah.
But I've seen how sick he was, and after leaving quarantine and celebrating, we're not celebrating. It was the saddest New Year's dinner I've ever had in my life. I'll never forget it. It was the four of us, me, you, a friend of mine, and dad. It was really sad. Um, it wasn't a happy New Year's for us. If you're Eastern Europeans, we celebrate New Year's. It's like Christmas for us. So you do the gifts. I feel like the way we grew up is you don't celebrate New Year's at a club with friends. You do it with family. Until this day, 26 years old and 26 years I've been celebrating at home. Like I've never went to, let's say, Vegas or like a wild party on New Year's Eve. It's always been like basically Christmas for us. And it was the saddest dinner that we had together. And 2 days later, I forced him to go to the hospital because of how sick he was around the house.
Yeah.
It was a trigger for me to see him this sick, shaking, barely able to walk. He didn't sleep. It was just a whole triggering moment to see him like that. And I remember I had to take him. Where were you? Did you come with me? Yeah, so we drove him to the hospital, and because we were suspecting he has COVID, we couldn't walk into the hospital. So he went alone, and he told me that he's scared that if he's going to walk in, he's not going to come out. And I told him, no, it's going to be fine. Like, up until today, I'm very optimistic. Even with mom, I always thought she would make it. I'm that person who, if you have a dream, nothing can stop you from achieving it. Or if you have a strong mindset, you will come out of anything that you go through in life, basically, right?
Yeah.
So we drove him to the hospital, and 2 days later, not even, he was in the hospital. He got tested positive for COVID. And then the doctors told him that he has a heart failure. Now, at this time, me and you were at home. We don't have any family here in Canada. It was us three, mom buried in a different country. Grandparents, everybody are living abroad, and just family, friends, and friends. And he got tested positive and was told that he has a heart failure and his heart is operating for 30%. Now, it all made sense. They entered a virus into his body with the COVID vaccine. So, it added up pretty easily. And then at that night, he had a heart attack and he went into coma. Now, it was such a scary time for us. I know for me, it was wild because we just lost one parent. Now we don't know what to do with the other parent. And I remember getting endless calls from doctors and making a decision what if his heart stops again? What are you going to do? what type of should we try to, do a CPR on him? Someone had to make the decisions, and it was me, while handling all the phone calls from his parents, my grandparents, and uncles and aunts, trying to see what we can do. Long story short, he was in a coma for 30 days. Then he had a septic shock. And once you have a septic shock, from what they explained to me, is your blood is infected. So all the blood that travels in your body is just infected. And from septic shock, you just pass away really quickly. And yeah, I remember I was at work. You were at school. And I think our friend picked you up to their house, and she had to drive you to school. And I was at work. Now, because he was in quarantine, we couldn't visit him. So until he was cleared for 2 weeks. And after he was cleared for 2 weeks, there was a protesting at the hospital with the nurses and the doctors. So there's always something stopping me from going into the hospital and trying to work, calming down Edward. Edward wasn't even aware of what really was happening, aside that he was in the hospital and we weren't able to see him. I think I was able to go into the hospital twice, but because of the circumstances, the hospital would FaceTime me. I was a religious woman back then, before we lost him. And I remember we had prayer services done twice for him to get better. And I know his family in Israel, everybody were praying, and they went to synagogue and prayed for him there. Everybody were praying for him. And I remember they called me that I need to come into the hospital. So I was working downtown in Toronto, and the hospital he was at, it was Toronto General Hospital. And I went in after work at 5 o'clock, and I stayed there till 6 a.m. Didn't sleep. It was the most intense night. He was going into a heart attack every single, like, his heart was failing on him every 10 minutes. They would, like, nurses and doctors were running like crazy. And I remember the doctor came to me and he said, the only thing you have left to do is pray for him. Now, I was in the hospital alone. Edward was with my friend and her family answering phone calls. I remember my friends came to the hospital, brought me food because I had no food. Everything was closed. It was intense. Zero sleep. I was praying all night for him, sitting on a chair, couldn't even close one eye. And the doctor came to me and he's like, if he's gonna pass away, what are we doing? Are we trying to save him? Like, if we save him and he does come out of this, you know what type of life you are expected for him to have. So he would be
Paralyzed?
he would be paralyzed. Like, he would have to learn how to eat and walk, a lot of physiotherapy. We don't know what brain damage he would have, if he would have survived. And I remember his mom went to a psychic in Israel. Crazy story, because we were so hopeless, we didn't know what will happen. I guess the doctors already knew he's gonna die, but when you're in that situation, maybe like a third person from the outside, they're like, okay, he's gonna pass away. But when you're in that situation, everything is just happening so fast. Time was running like crazy. Everybody were hopeless. So his mom went to a psychic and she told her that he will survive. He will come out of the. I don't know if you even know this story. Do you know this story?
No, you told me.
Okay. She said, basically in her words, she said he's in a dirty house, very fallen apart house, but he will come out of it. He will come out of it stronger. And she gave me that call at like 3 or 4 a.m. And at 6 a.m., I was already, when you don't sleep all night, you just get pissy and angry. So I was like, I need to go to sleep. I can't sleep in the hospital. Like, there was no room for me to sleep. We were at the intensive care unit. He was there for 30 days. So my friend came to pick me up. She was living closer to the hospital. So I was like, okay, let me go sleep for 5 hours. The psychic said that, it sounds so funny right now when I say it, but the psychic said he will make it through. Let me go sleep so I can make clear decisions with a clear mind after having some sleep, because I was up since 6 a.m. to go to work. I worked a full shift, went to the hospital, stayed throughout the entire night at the hospital. I remember coming to her house. I went to shower. And it's just that feeling. I was wearing office clothes too. So I wasn't even like cozy sweatpants, I was wearing like like casual pants for work, sweater, blazer, had boots on, like a nice coat, intense. Anyway, so taking a fresh shower was just amazing. And as I was putting my head down to sleep, and you don't need your phone, you don't need nothing. You just want to put your head on the pillow and go to sleep. I get a phone call from the nurse. She's like, "Hey, Lolita, we're calling in regards to your father. When are you coming back to the hospital?" I was like, "I'm going to come back in 5 hours." And I remember her saying, "He doesn't have 5 hours." I was like, "Okay, I'll come back in 3." And then I close my eyes again, and then I get another call. And they're like, "Hi, Lolita, we're calling from the hospital. It's regarding that. When are you coming back?" And I was like, "I'm going to come back in 3 hours." And they're like, "He doesn't have 3 hours." I was like, "Okay, I'm going to come in an hour." And then the third phone call, the doctor called, not the nurses this time. And it wasn't when you're coming back. It was, "We're so sorry for your loss. He passed away." I remember jumping out of bed. I was so tired. My body was like flight or fight mode. I was screaming my lungs out. And Edward was at school, had no idea what was going on. I just put on sweatpants sweater my friend gave me. She drove me to the hospital, and I started notifying everybody that we lost him. I don't know what's worse, getting the call that he passed away or notifying his parents. The screams.
Definitely notifying his parents.
Yeah, notifying his family. His mother gets a call that her son just passed away and she's in a different country, can't travel because they were elderly and it was COVID and their chances of getting sick was really high and he had COVID. Nobody knew what to do at that situation. I heard screams, desperate screams of parents who just lost their son and a brother who lost a brother. We were driving there, and I remember it was snowing, and I felt like I was part of a movie. Looking out of the window, I felt so numb. I felt drained. I felt shocked. I was like, how is this happening to us again? And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, how am I notifying Edward that he lost his closest person again? With Mama was different. Daughters and mothers relationship are different, but son and father are different. If we have male listeners listening to this, every boy needs a father figure in their life. They are raised different when they're raised by just a woman and when they're raised by a man. And Edward and Dad had a really, really close relationship. So we went to the hospital. I had to say my goodbyes. The only people I told he passed away was closest family, but I started getting so many messages on Facebook, WhatsApp, calls. "So sorry for your loss. So sorry." Like it was wild. It was the wildest time I went through with his passing because it was sudden. With Mom's passing, like cancer, it's a long overdue journey to the point where you're like, okay, when is this done? But with that, it was so quick. It was so sudden. We didn't expect it to happen, like a car crash, boom, and the person is not with us. And I remember I was taken to the hospital, and then my girlfriends drove to the hospital too to show support. And we drove after I said my goodbyes to him. And I went to the, not HR, but like the person who organized everything in the hospital. She gave me like a death certificate, reasoning of death, all the paperwork. We had to go tell Edward. Do you remember?
I do remember.
So
Yeah,
do you want to
very
share?
cool. One thing, although in the hospital, I remember you telling me when they told you it was really his decision whether he wants to wake up or not. But yeah, from my part of the story, that morning I woke up and got ready to go to school. I remember the night before, my sister was in the hospital and I get a text from her. She's like, "Hey, pack all your things. My friend's picking you up. You're going to spend the night there." I'm like, "Why? I don't want to. I want to be at home waiting for you to come home." She's like, "I'm not coming home tonight. Sorry."
You were how old?
I was just turned 10.
Okay.
Yeah. And she's like, "Sorry, I'm not going to come home tonight. So I don't want you to be alone. Just pack up your stuff and head out." And I remember her picking me up. I had dinner at their house, spent the night. And in the morning, because I had my Apple Watch at the time, right? That's when I first got it. I used to message Lola in class. And I remember in French, she texted me, she's like, "Hey, I love you so much," right? I was like, well, yeah, of course I know that. She's like, I haven't got any sleep, so I'm gonna try to get some sleep. I was like, okay, yeah, go for it. She's like, I'll pick you up after school today. I'm like, no, you do whatever you need to do. I'll walk back to their place. And then I thought I was gonna go back to her friends, and she came with her friend that drove her to the hospital to pick me up, and she turned around to see and she said, Dad's gone. And in that moment, I just froze, had no words. I'm like, what just happened? I don't understand what just happened. As we're coming out of the car when we get home, I just fall into her arms and cry. It was a very sad moment.
Hmm. It was a hard moment because he passed away and my mom is buried abroad. We just lost two parents. We need to decide where we're going to live, where we're going to bury him. Of course, his wish was to be buried with my mom. And when she was buried, we bought two hearts. So when one spouse dies, you buy a spot for the living spouse and then you bury them together basically. So his wish was to be buried with mom. I had no idea how you do it, but slowly we figured it out. We did it over 5 days. We had to go set up the transfer from one country, be transferred overseas to another country, set up the whole ceremony. Now, because mom was buried, we had her headstone already in place with dad's part. So many things went in the background. And another issue we had was financial. I wasn't earning good money whatsoever when he passed away. I was 22. I was earning minimum even with a post-secondary education. We didn't have any money. They didn't have any will in place. Obviously, no guardianship. Taking him out of the country.
And I remember also that day after he passed away, her phone was ringing nonstop, not just from relatives, but lawyers, like what will we do?
Social
Yeah,
workers.
oh yeah. In 1 week, we had like 3 social workers come to our house.
Yeah, we did.
It was insane.
We had to process the guardianship quick. We had to get temporary guardianship so I could take him out of the country, travel for the ceremony, and then be at the ceremony for mom's 1 year. So it was burying one parent, going to a second parent anniversary, and making the decision whether we should move abroad or stay in Canada. In the back of my mind, I always wanted to move back home overseas because we had everybody there, like the entire family, uncles, aunts. We come from a big family from both sides. So it made sense for us to move there. And I remember when we bought our tickets, we got it for 5 weeks in a hope of, attending and burying our dad, attending mom's 1 year, and trying to find a job, rent, extracurricular programs for Edward. Therapy was much needed, to see a therapist and get a car. I think after being there for 3 weeks, I lost my mind. We had a really bad connection too at the time.
Yeah.
I don't think you trusted me. I think you questioned a lot of my decisions. I was very short tempered.
Oh,
It was really hard for me to explain what was happening. On one hand, you have a child, a 10-year-old. On the other hand, you need to treat him as an adult because I'm making a decision for the two of us. And you're not my child, you're my brother. But, we had some family issues where I remember I dropped him off at our relatives and I tried calling him and he wouldn't pick up the phone. And he said that he doesn't want to talk to me right now. I'll never forget this moment.
It wasn't that I didn't want to talk to anyone at all.
I know, but
I was like, I'm turning off my phone and that's that. It wasn't just you I didn't want to talk to, it's everyone else.
I know. But he was at a different house. I was at a different house. The only family, my close family that I have, doesn't want to speak to me. I was so concerned. I'm like, how are we? What if I want to move back to Canada? Like, how are we doing this? Are we like not talking? Do you hate me? How do I even fill in the gap?
The reason that why I wanted to turn off my phone that day is because the dad side of the family took it very hard, and they would nonstop talk about it. They're like, oh, like he did this to himself. He wanted to like kill himself. I was like, that's not what happened.
Not kill himself,
not
but
kill,
he
but, like,
didn't want to
wanted
live.
yeah. And I stormed out that door, just slammed it shut, and I turned off my phone.
Yeah.
And that was that.
It was really tough for us to communicate, to trust, to learn how to live through life together. But I remember when I came to pick him up and we had a conversation. And that's when I realized that I think we might move back to Canada because I know you wanted to stay back home with the family. What did you tell me? Do you remember? You told me, Lolachka, kudate tudaya?
Oh
Wherever
yeah,
you decide,
wherever you decide to go with, I'll go with you. No questions asked.
no matter what.
No matter what, too. Yeah, that's what I
Yeah,
said. No matter what.
yeah. But after that, we left because we were supposed to be there for 5 weeks. We left after 3 weeks. I was losing my
Or
mind.
yeah,
I feel like
that,
I
yeah.
was more
We left.
depressed in there than I would have been in Canada. It was just too much to bear with. And I knew coming back to Canada, we had so much to solve. I knew I had to change my position at work. It wasn't meeting our financial ends. We still had to figure out the custody part, no will in place. Still trying to figure out until this day, actually. So if you're a parent and you have kids, make sure to have a will in place because not every single child will have the energy and the ability to solve such matter. But yeah, our relationship literally went through a roller coaster. But I wanted to ask you, Edward, how do you think we've supported each other?
Emotionally.
But how?
Like, don't be afraid to hide things from me. Or like, don't be afraid to suppress your emotions, keep them bottled up. Anything you need at all, I'm here and you can trust me on that. Because I know then I didn't trust you. But when you gave me your word, like, you know what? Give it a shot. And every
Yeah.
time I would be upset, she was just right there
Yeah.
at my shoulder. I was like, you know what? I'm really trusting her.
Mhm.
And I think that moving back to Canada was probably one of the best decisions you've made.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted you to share some of your school experience. I feel like we need to bring awareness to this. Of course, we moved back here and Edward was attending middle school. He's going to high school next year, but he was attending middle school and there were some issues with kids. Do you want to share your story?
Yeah, before when people at my school especially didn't know like that my parents had passed.
Dave knew. I've notified the school.
Or yeah, you notified the school, but the teachers didn't share it with the kids until I gave it the okay.
Okay.
And before I used to have a lot of problems like with kids talking about my weight and stuff and
Okay.
it used to really bring me down at the times. But then when I shared my story about our parents, everyone just silenced. They didn't speak to me that day after that happened. I think they were avoiding conversations with me because they knew I was upset about it. Back then, I learned that I just had to develop thicker skin
Why?
because I used to get really like destroyed when people would call me like fat.
Not only fat, but I remember one incident, they called me. You were at camp.
Oh, yeah, let me explain this. So
Okay.
I was at camp and I didn't understand the concept of like sharing your story too fast. Cause I used to like everyone would go be like, oh yeah, my parents had passed away. I used to look for pity a lot of times. And I shared my story to this kid in camp. I don't remember his name, but
It
one
doesn't matter.
time,
We're
yeah, we
keeping.
got into an argument and he was like, at least I have parents. I'm like, say that again. And usually every day at camp, we would go out, we would cross those like train tracks there, and then we would go to a park. And I started chasing them, and he turned around to throw a punch at me. And as I was still running, when he turned around, I just clocked him right in the face.
But he said, at least I have parents. Ha ha ha.
Yeah, like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, hey, say that again. He's like, at least I have parents.
Yeah. But now, from my perspective, having a call and hearing that someone just, for me, like as an adult, no one would ever say that to you. But we know kids are more harsh, can
Yeah.
be evil too. And when I got a call saying that someone made fun that at least he has parents alive, of course I didn't get mad at you. I would never get mad at
No,
you,
for sure.
but I was just furious. And I have temper issues too. When I was told, Edward, when I was told that someone made a joke about him not having parents alive while that wound is so fresh, it hasn't even been a year, I lost my,
Beep.
yeah, S word. It was really hard. It wasn't the first incident you had. You had
Oh,
a
I had
lot of them at
multiple other
school. Yeah.
ones, yeah.
Someone laughed at him not having a dad. Well, at least I have a dad and you don't. Like, it was a lot of issues. So hopefully if anyone is listening to this and they have kids, make sure to teach your children to be a little bit more sensitive. I know we don't teach our kids about grief or what death is. It's a whole another topic. But if, the teacher does advise the class and the parents that one of the class members lost a parent, we need to teach that sensitivity and respect towards others' loss because it takes time to process, right?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
And I have a question for you, actually.
Okay.
How did you feel after the camp called you and told you that I got violence with somebody? Like that I physically hurt somebody? How did you feel?
I didn't hear it. I didn't hear the part that Edward got violent. I heard the part that someone made a joke.
Mm-hmm.
So that pissed me off so much. And I'm like, you throwing hands,
Not me. That's not me. You know,
but
I don't
you
usually, but when I
punching
have
or
to,
doing whatever back,
yeah,
I would never. Like, you need to stand up
for
on your
sure.
ground.
No, yeah, no, for sure. And then at that point, it's just that I've heard it so many times to the
And
point
what did I tell
where
you?
to develop thicker skin
And stop
and
sharing.
stop sharing. Yeah, because I used to look for pity for it everywhere.
Yeah.
Like I would even.
You looked for attention.
Oh yeah. I was a big attention seeker.
He was. Like, I would get
admit,
calls from his teachers.
I would even, it got so to the point where I would use it to get out of like homework.
I know.
And I was like, you know what? I gotta stop, man, because it started to get bad.
It was getting bad. Yes. I think you weren't getting enough attention from me. I won't lie.
Yeah, yeah. At home, usually what I'll do is I'll just go to my room, video games, and that's it.
Yeah, but it was hard. I wasn't a parent. It's different when a woman carries a child for 9 months. You kind of prepare. You have that motherhood instinct. But here it's like, here you go, raise a kid. You were not prepared. I know we were raised differently. Again, makes sense why we were growing up together the way we were. But it took me time. I was taking parenting calls to know how to best help you. Yes, I was. And then my therapist was a big help too. But it wasn't easy. I look at him as my brother. If you have a sibling, you do half and half. Look, this is mine, this is yours, you can't have mine. I remember you ate my lunch.
Oh my god.
I got
do
pissed.
remember. Wow. Yeah. So she made poke bowl and we had it for dinner. And she left herself some for lunch for work.
Yeah, next day.
And it was so good because I remember I didn't have any portion control. Like, oh, it's good. Let me have more.
Yeah.
And I remember I snuck downstairs, opened the fridge, and I see her lunch. I was like,
and he ate it.
You know what? Yeah, and I ate it. And in the morning, because she took me to the office that day and dad was at work.
Yeah.
And she called dad and she was like, Dad, I want to like literally just kill him. Yeah, kill your son.
Yeah.
And
I was pissed.
That day she also took me into work with her.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was insane. The whole car ride and the train ride to downtown the office was just pure silent. She didn't even want to look at me.
But again, because I looked at him as my brother, and being a caregiver for 4 years as a woman, my hormones were all over the place. They were not balanced whatsoever. That's why I focus on hormonal balance. I focus on internal healing. I focus on grief because I went through all of it. And today I feel like I'm a great role model for you.
Yeah, for sure.
Who believes in you and pushes you to do better and dream big and achieve your goals and listen and be more sensitive, open-hearted, and more caring towards you, right? It took time to learn. There is no book on how to be a caregiver sister out there. Maybe I should work on something like that. But again, it was difficult.
It should be something you could work on in the future.
Maybe, who knows? But again, it's still not simple. We're still figuring it out as you're growing, puberty, dating, high school. Time is flying. In 4 years, you have to make a decision on which college or university to go to. Like it's major, right? What is the one thing you wish people understood about losing parents at your age?
I think they should understand that when they lose their parents at that age, who they're going to stay with. Because, who knows if they have distant relatives or not. I highly doubt most of my friends don't have relatives that live in, like, Canada, for example. But one thing I want them to understand is, who would you live with? Because you live with your parents all these years in your life. And just thinking to yourself, where would I go if I lost both my parents? I think that's one thing that I would want them to understand if they lost both their parents.
What else?
The decisions you make for yourself. Because I know your goal is to teach me my own decision making. God forbid anything happens to you. I know you would want me to make decisions for myself. And that you want me to know what I think would be best for me,
If
which is
anything
also pretty.
happens.
If anything happens to you, which I think is crucial. It's really important.
I know you go to therapy. You had a counselor at school that you were seeing, and then you had a therapist that you were attending. Would you suggest it to others? You started therapy at what age? 11?
11. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would suggest therapy over school counseling.
Okay.
Because school counseling, they pull you out of class. You're like, hey, how's it going? And usually to make you feel better, they bring a game for you. So like, for example, when I had my social worker at school, his name was Mark. He would bring in like Uno, for example, that we would play with. And usually we wouldn't even talk about how I felt. He'll be like, hey, how are you? Yeah, I'm good. And then we play Uno and he sends me back to class. I think that in therapy, you get more into it because you're just sitting on a couch, with a glass of water, and a person is asking you how you're doing, like how would you compare to this, that? How do you feel living with your sister? Because they try to gain insight from you to know what could be the best help for you. And what I like about therapy, it's all, what's it called? When
Confidential?
Confidential, yes. It's all confidential. Like in therapy, when I'll do it, whatever I talk about, unless I'm talking about self-harm towards me, they won't tell a single word to my sister, which I like to, unless I talk about self-harm.
So every time I would drive him after a session, I would ask him how it would go, and if he wishes to share, he does. And if he doesn't,
then I
you
don't.
you needed your space to share, and especially because he was attention seeking from others, and I feel like I wasn't emotionally available to you to hear you out, because you were my trigger with grief.
Really?
Yeah, when we would drive around and you would endlessly talk about that this we did this with that, we did, like you would
Yeah, I
always
did talk
mention
about that
that
a
it
lot.
would, like I would ask you to stop. And I was very pissy about it because I still didn't heal. I was mad for the longest time, and him having like very happy moments, whereas I am pissed remembering how he talked about now wanting to live and leave us behind, and then leaving us behind, and not prepping anything properly if it's from legal perspective, and just disappearing, but me honoring the wishes of bearing him with mom, which was his number one wish, and taking care of you. I've done everything from my part, but nobody thought of me. So I had my anger, whereas he had the missing stage. Like you were missing him, you wanted to talk about him, you wanted to remember, but it was just triggering me all the time to hear it.
Yeah, and I remember especially that side of the family, they loved to remember.
Oh yeah.
As I got older and I understood it, it kind of got annoying.
That they would always say.
Hearing them constantly talk about him, like, hey, he's gone, and we all understand, and you talking about it doesn't make it any better. And I think that's also a really crucial point in grief, because obviously after he passes away, you want to talk about him, but talking about him or her or your loved one that passed away, it doesn't bring them back to life, or like it doesn't do you any better. You're just making yourself more upset. And I think that's also a really good crucial point in grieving.
So you would suggest therapy?
I would suggest therapy. Yeah, therapy is way better.
Okay.
Even for the younger kids too, honestly. Like I have a friend, Michael, from school. He goes to therapy too. He used to go to therapy. Because he used to have like mental problems. Like it would be like, everyone's better than me. I don't like how I'm doing in life, that. But after therapy, I can see he's really improved, because he wasn't much of a social butterfly back in like the 5th grade when I was here. And then in 7th to 8th grade, he has like 9, 10 friends that constantly go to his house and hang out with him. I'm like, wow, I'm really proud of him. Because in 5th grade, I was one of his first friends.
Right.
And I'll even remember that. Even you remember after school, I would text you on my Apple Watch, hey, can I go to Michael's after school? Hey, can I go to Michael's, whatever, this, that, can we hang out? And to this day, we still hang out. And it's really wonderful times too.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap up this episode. Edward, I am really proud and happy to have you in my life. You are the greatest gift.
Thank you.
I don't know what my journey would look like alone. Grief is lonely, but I am so thankful for having you by my side. And I'm excited for our future together. I'm excited to build my own family and marry and bring children to the world and have you as their best uncle.
Oh yeah, for
raising
sure.
them. I know it's going
I would be honored to. I'd be really happy to. Yeah.
It's interesting how the dynamic will be because it's like my children, but you're growing up together, right? But I love you so much.
I love you too.
Thank you for being my first guest in my new studio.
Thank you for hosting me as your first guest on a new studio.
Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Glow with Lola. Don't forget to subscribe, like this episode, and send me a DM to tell me how you think this episode went. We love you guys and appreciate your
Support.
love it. Until next episode.